Open your kitchen cabinet right now. That small glass jar of brown powder gathering dust once helped trigger mass killings, a stolen empire, and a war. You sprinkle it on pumpkin pie in your autumn latte without a single thought. 4 centuries ago, men slaughtered thousands of people just to control it. That spice is nutmeg, and its violent, overlooked history helped shape the fate of the island of Manhattan in a trade that sounds insane today. The Dutch once controlled New York. They traded it away willingly for a single remote island most people alive today have never even heard of. That island was barely 2 miles long. It held no gold, no silver, and no strategic value, except for one thing growing wild in its soil: nutmeg trees. And for a brief, ruthless moment in history, this humble baking spice ranked among the most valuable commodities in all of Europe. So a global empire looked at what would become one of the world's great cities and chose a remote, jungle-covered island instead. Why would anyone do that? To answer that, we have to travel back 400 years to a world where a single seed could buy a fortune and ignite a massacre. This is the true, hard-fought story of how one everyday spice funded a corporate empire, devastated an island people, and helped reshape the future of New York. Look at that jar differently by the end of this video. This is the overlooked history of nutmeg and one of history's darkest trades. The year is 1600. Europe has just emerged from centuries of plague and war, and its wealthiest elites crave a new symbol of status. It was not gold, it was not silk. The ultimate flex of extreme wealth was something stranger: exotic spices shipped from the distant, uncharted East. Meat spoiled fast without refrigeration and was often heavily salted. A single pinch of the right spice could turn a rotten meal into a feast. But nutmeg was considered the king of them all. Many Europeans believed it could protect against the plague, so desperate nobles paid almost anything for it. A single pouch of nutmeg could cost more than a skilled worker earned in years. But this miracle spice hid one massive problem nobody could solve. But the bloodiest chapter hadn't even begun. It grew in one place only: the Banda Islands, a remote volcanic cluster deep in the Indonesian seas. Reaching them was a near-suicidal voyage. Sailors faced violent storms, starvation, disease, and pirate fleets just for the chance to glimpse a nutmeg tree. Spain and Portugal both launched large armadas, desperate to claim the prize. Neither empire could hold on to it for long. Someone more ruthless was coming. Enter the Dutch. Organized, disciplined, and utterly determined to dominate global trade, whatever the human cost. They were about to reshape the balance of global commerce. In 1602, the Dutch created the East India Company, one of history's earliest multinational corporations. It arrived equipped with warships, soldiers, and real teeth. This corporate giant had its own private army, its own navy, and the legal right to wage war, sign treaties, and execute enemies without royal approval. Its focus became the Banda Islands. The company wanted total control over every nutmeg tree growing anywhere on the face of the earth. Imagine opening your own pantry today. Someone once risked and lost everything for that same warm, familiar smell sitting quietly on your shelf. But the native Bandanese were shrewd, experienced traders. They preferred selling to multiple nations at once and refused to hand any single power a monopoly. That simple demand for fair trade would seal their fate. A corporate empire built on total control does not tolerate competition or defiance. One respected Bandanese village elder had spent decades trading fairly with Arab, Chinese, and European merchants, and warned his people this new companies wanted more than trade. Tension built quickly in the humid island air. Dutch soldiers began fortifying the shores, preparing for something the islanders could not yet imagine. The stakes were almost unimaginable. Whoever controlled the nutmeg supply effectively controlled the economy of Europe and the future direction of global trade. The company was done negotiating and wanted the islands completely. Contemporary accounts suggest profit margins on a single shipload of nutmeg reached thousands of %. To protect that fortune, the Dutch enforced brutal laws. Smuggling even a single nutmeg seed off the islands became an offence punishable by execution. They soaked every exported seed in lime, deliberately destroying its ability to sprout anywhere else on Earth. But the islanders kept trading with the English. This quiet defiance infuriated the Dutch company. A new commander was already being groomed for the islands, a man about to answer with fire. He had built his reputation on ruthless efficiency elsewhere in the region, and company leaders in Amsterdam trusted him completely with what came next. In 1621, that commander finally arrived on the islands. His name was Jan Pieterszoon Koen, and he was not interested in negotiation. Koen did not simply want to punish the islanders for trading with rivals. He wanted them permanently removed, and he brought soldiers and ships to do it. What happened next remains one of the darkest chapters in the history of European colonialism, a calculated campaign of extermination carried out for a spice. Koen's soldiers swept across the islands, burning villages and hunting down anyone who resisted. A tropical paradise became a killing ground within weeks. Village leaders were publicly executed as warnings. Thousands of men, women, and children were hunted down, killed, or driven off volcanic cliffs into the sea. An entire population of roughly 15,000 people was almost completely destroyed. Only a few hundred survived, and they were taken into permanent slavery. The islands fell silent, smoke drifting over empty villages. The Dutch then replaced the vanished population, importing enslaved labourers to farm the surviving nutmeg trees. A simple kitchen spice was now soaked in real human blood. The Dutch finally had their monopoly, but one small, stubborn island still resisted. One island still refused to fall. That island was called Run, barely 2 miles long, covered in nutmeg trees, and defended by determined English merchants. The English had secretly claimed and fortified Run, and it quickly became a persistent, infuriating obstacle inside the Dutch company's carefully guarded monopoly. For years, the two great European powers fought an exhausting shadow war over this single remote patch of jungle, thousands of miles from home. An English commander named Nathaniel Courthope defended Run with remarkable resolve, enduring years of siege, hunger, and relentless Dutch cannon fire, refusing to surrender. Eventually, Courthope was ambushed, and clouds. The Dutch finally seized the island, burning English settlements and tearing the sacred nutmeg trees from the ground. Yet the English still refused to formally give up their legal claim to Run. A single contested island threatened to ignite a continental war. Tension between England and the Netherlands kept boiling. Both nations were losing money, losing ships, and desperately searching for a way to end the standoff. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, in an unfamiliar wilderness Europeans called North America, a completely different conflict was quietly beginning to unfold. The Dutch had built a modest trading post there, a small settlement they named New Amsterdam, sitting on a marshy island called Manhattan. New Amsterdam thrived quietly, trading beaver pelts and timber, but English warships sailed in without warning and seized the fledgling settlement for themselves. Now, both empires held something the other wanted. The stage was being set for one of the most unequal trades in history. In 1667, the two exhausted powers finally sat down to negotiate what became known as the Treaty of Breda, hoping to end years of bloodshed. The stakes were high. Both sides needed a lasting settlement to stabilize their economies and secure their rapidly expanding, deeply profitable colonial ventures. The English held the promising North American settlement of Manhattan. The Dutch held the scorched ruins of the small Nutmeg island of Run. Two islands, one impossible decision, and neither side wanted to blink first. It was time to make a deal, weighing distant markets against decades of war. The trade was never a simple island swap. It was one small piece inside a much larger peace settlement between two exhausted empires. Still, English negotiators genuinely believed the cold, swampy island of Manhattan was worth far less than the guaranteed riches of the Eastern spice trade. The Dutch agreed completely. They wanted their nutmeg monopoly protected above all else and viewed the freezing American colony as a costly distraction. So the deal was struck. A handful of signatures quietly helped reshape the course of colonial history in a matter of minutes. The Dutch formally recognized English control of New Netherland, while securing undisputed control over Run through the broader peace settlement. In return, the English gave up their claim to Run, leaving the Dutch in full, uncontested control of the nutmeg trade at last. The ink dried and the treaty was sealed. The Dutch celebrated, utterly convinced they had struck what they believed was one of the shrewdest bargains in modern history. The English soon renamed their new American territory. New Amsterdam was rechristened New York in honor of the English Duke of York. That same spice, ground fine and forgotten, still sits beside your coffee today in a jar most people never think twice about. At that exact moment, the Dutch were thrilled. They now controlled the world's most valuable spice and believed they had secured lasting national wealth. New York was merely a cold, muddy outpost surrounded by dense forest. Run Island, by comparison, seemed like a license to print money. For a brief, golden stretch, the Dutch East India Company became one of the richest and most powerful corporations the world had ever seen. They built magnificent European palaces, funded by the exploitation of enslaved Indonesian workers and the world's growing appetite for their guarded nutmeg. But their empire was already rotting from within, weakened by terror, forced labor, and a refusal to adapt to changing world trade. The first crack appeared quietly. French botanist Pierre Poivre helped break the Dutch monopoly by introducing viable nutmeg plants beyond their tightly guarded islands. He successfully planted those stolen seeds on the island of Mauritius. Suddenly, the impossible happened. The Dutch iron-fisted monopoly had finally been broken. Then, nature itself turned against the empire. A powerful earthquake and tsunami struck the Banda Islands, destroying roughly half of their nutmeg plantations. The value of nutmeg began to slowly collapse. As rival nations successfully grew the spice elsewhere, global supply flooded the market, and prices fell. Nutmeg shifted from an elite, wildly expensive luxury reserved for royalty into a cheap, common ingredient sitting quietly on grocery store shelves everywhere. The Dutch never realized the balance had already begun to shift. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the once forgotten island of Manhattan was steadily becoming an unstoppable engine of financial power. The English used its deep natural harbor to build a booming trading empire, and New York quickly became the beating financial heart of the Americas. While Tiny Run faded into obscurity, New York grew towering skyscrapers and gave rise to the legendary financial district known as Wall Street. The Dutch East India Company, once the dominant master of global oceans, eventually collapsed under crushing debt and years of internal corruption. Their once heavily guarded island of Run became irrelevant. Today, it remains a quiet, overlooked village with barely a trace of its violent past. New York City, meanwhile, now holds a larger economy than most entire nations on Earth, shaping global finance, culture, and politics every single day. The financial scale is honestly staggering. Land now valued in the trillions once seemed, to Dutch eyes, far less valuable than a single spice island. Think about that for a second. Land, now worth trillions, was casually traded away just to secure a spice, now forgotten in the back of your pantry. But the real story doesn't end there. The Dutch had essentially given up the future financial capital of the Western world for a fleeting spice monopoly. It stands today as one of the more spectacular miscalculations in colonial history, a single trade that captures this strange arithmetic of empire. You might think that is where this story ends, a simple tale of bad business judgment, but the true cost runs far deeper. That true cost was never measured in trillions or in trade regrets. It was measured in devastated communities and a people nearly erased from history. The Banda Islands massacre remains underrepresented in many Western history curricula, and we casually celebrate New York's rise largely unaware of the tragedy that helped make it possible. Every tourist snapping a photo in Times Square stands in a city whose rise was shaped, in part, by decisions born from that distant colonial violence. It is a sobering reminder of how parts of our modern world were built, lives were destroyed, and human beings were endlessly commodified for profit. And it was all done for a flavor, a simple aromatic seed that we now buy for pennies and let quietly expire in dark cabinets. But look closer, and the deepest layer of this story isn't really about two rival empires at all. It was never simply about the Dutch versus the English, monarchy against monarchy. It was one corporation hunting profit at any human cost. That is the deepest layer of this story. What happened in Banda was not simply war, it was genocide, committed in the name of a spice. Today, visitors to the remote island of Run find crumbling Dutch forts vanishing into jungle, while nutmeg trees still drop seeds onto soil that witnessed one of colonial history's darkest massacres. Local descendants still harvest the spice by hand today, living quiet lives far removed from the corporate greed that once ruled over their ancestors. The legacy of the Dutch East India Company still lingers, though. It pioneered the ruthless, profit-driven corporate model that still shapes our modern world. It proved that a powerful monopoly could bend entire governments to its will, prioritizing shareholder profit over basic human life and simple morality. Walking down the busy streets of modern Manhattan, you'll still find lingering traces of that original Dutch settlement in the old street names around you. Wall Street takes its name from a wooden defensive wall built by the Dutch in 17th century New Amsterdam, a reminder that even global financial capitals began as vulnerable frontier settlements. The connections are honestly everywhere if you simply know where to look. History is not just trapped in old books, it lives in daily life. So, what other ordinary object sitting in your own home might be quietly hiding an epic, forgotten history of conquest and fallen empires? What ordinary object should we uncover next? Tell us below, because history is hiding in places we stopped noticing. Stay curious.